Hey y'all, it's me, Dani, baby. How is your spirit? Like for real, let's take a second, just speed down, slow up, and really ask yourself that question. How are we feeling today? How's our spirit feeling? I got to walk into this space today and was reminded of abundance from a very lovely human that is helping me facilitate this podcast space. So really just sit with that as we kind of move into the space of communicating today. This is obviously about myself today, where I'm feeling abundant in my joy. See, I have been in a big space of waves and movement and almost feeling like I don't really know the direction that I'm in, which is okay because it's allowing me to know that I am reconnecting with my intuition. And I think what happened in the past year is that as I was really focusing on my healing and focusing on the inward things, there were people and instances popping up in my life that were just showing themselves in a more cunning manner. And what I mean by cunning is that they just found new ways of taking my joy. I don't really want to say stealing, because in my observational way, I would sit in a space knowing that we needed to share energy. And then I'd walk away from some of these conversations feeling completely depleted, right? And I'm like, where is my energy source going? Where I've been filling my cup and now I just feel so drained all of the time. And I really had to take a moment and look around the room, including myself. I was doing things within my own self that was quite literally gatekeeping me from me by allowing so many individuals into my direct circle that were unfortunately distracting me and siphoning energy that I wasn't consenting to giving away. And it took a long time for me to recognize that. I literally had to hit the deepest burnout that I ever was in order to face that so honestly. So this is living vicariously through myself, just some of the things that have kind of been going on in my realm. Again, I'm not here to encourage anyone. I quite literally am just speaking to myself, almost like body doubling with the parallel of communicating with even just my yesterday self. Like, wow, you didn't know that you could even get here to this chair today. So that's what I'm doing. So I'm going to start off in this direction, even though we already had that little intro time. And the direction that I'm speaking to is how we can gatekeep ourselves from ourselves. See, I grew up in a cult, and I do reference this quite a bit because I feel like for a majority of my life, I'm going to be always interested in why the inner workings of that fear-mongering space can really keep us almost feeling in a way of sin, if you will. And it's such a weird language. There are times that I'll do something that doesn't align with my moral compass, and I will think of it as sin because that was so implemented into my brain. So to speak about the gatekeeping of myself from myself is to go back to the ways of grooming that existed in purity culture in the cult realm. And so the purity culture and the grooming that exists primarily for people that identify as women. See, in the cult and church realm, it's very rare that you will be identifiable, that they would even allow you to identify as anything other than male or female. And so I didn't have the language or the representation of what I am to myself now. So being in that space where you just saw one or the other, and you obviously, I was viewed and identified as female, even though I always felt uncomfortable with that. And I never wanted to be a man either. That's never been a thing. I just didn't relate to either. And it just didn't make sense. But I had a big perspective sitting in those spaces, right? So in the church realm and in the purity culture realm, I was witnessing and was part of a very cunning process that is called grooming. And that is grooming our minds and our energies to be subservient, to literally detach us from our innate wisdom, hence our intuition. I was listening to a creator the other day, and I just don't remember their name, but they were saying, like, pay attention to your inner child when you get around people. How does your inner child react to meeting someone? And I've really been taking that in account, because when I was younger, I did not have governing over my own body, let alone my thoughts. And that sounds crazy. Like, I wasn't able to even be in my own thoughts. They keep you so busy and so chaotic and confused, even though their scripture says that God is not the author of confusion. That's what fear-mongering is. That's what grooming is. It's a repetition of getting you in that vibration of confusion, which takes you away from your intuition. And so in that grooming space and in that purity culture, I didn't know how to read my intuition. I would ignore it because the adults were saying it was okay. I met multitudes of people in the church realm that made me so unbelievably uncomfortable that I would later find out, because they would repent for their sins, that they were abusing a young person, or that they were dealing with a bout of sin that quite literally was sexual abuse on a minor, a child. And something that's so fascinating that will help it happen in the cult realm and in the purity culture realm is that the predator is the one that's going to be more embraced for that than the victim. I've witnessed it over and over, where a young person would come forward, or the elder would come forward and say, I need to apologize. I've been dealing with the space of sin by committing adultery on my spouse with a 14, 12, however young, under 18, which adulthood at 18 is insane to me, because I wasn't prepared to be an adult ever, but I was forced into these realms. But I see 18-year-olds today, and I'm like, y'all ain't adults. You still anyway, I could get on a whole tangent. But to just continue understanding that fear-mongering space is a way to pull us away from our own innate intuition. So again, not having governing over our bodies to where we had to sit and listen to a malignant human speak about their sin and be embraced, whereas the victim would be the person that needs to repent, needs to go to classes so they can learn to not be so salacious, if you will, was one of the most frustrating, not to mention infuriating things I ever witnessed. So I say all of that to just create the space to know that I've always had a tough time living according to my intuition, because again, I didn't have governing over my own body, for one, governing over my own thoughts, and governing over what was being constantly fed to me. And so because of that, I strayed away from those gut feelings, that intuition piece, because I would meet people and I'd feel gross about it. And my mother, primarily my mom, would be the one initiating that I go and have a conversation with, or I sit with that person, or I embrace them more. Quick synopsis on that is my mother went through the same kind of grooming process, but it wasn't in church. It was just how things always were growing up in the household that she grew up in. Everybody knew abuse existed, but we just didn't speak about it. And there was something really brilliant that was said on, goodness, I can't even, for some reason, I'm drawing a blank, but there was something really brilliant to that is like, if we don't teach history, then we're going to continue repeating it. And so because my mom didn't want to teach me about the history that was the family and what we were going through, basically feeling almost like a family curse of abuse that we were living in, she again delivered me to my abusers. So being delivered to my abuser by somebody that endured the same abuse from their abuser was, again, we're not taking the history and treating it as a lesson. We are pulling people away from their intuition. And so being pulled away from that, I wasn't allowed to have an opinion about how somebody was affecting my spirit. So that's why I'm so adamant about asking someone how their spirit is doing and taking a second and tuning into that, because we ask these like very redundant, simple questions that are like, how are you? Good, I'm good, blah, blah, blah. And it's all in passing. But like, let's take a second. Let's tune in. Like, really, how are you? As a person that was pulled away from it for so long, I enjoy sitting with a person in that space of just them reconnecting to their gut. And so I think it would be amazing if we all could do a little bit more of that. Just ask anyone one day, just how is your spirit? And just watch them sit with that question, because we don't ask that very often. Anyway, so once I started understanding after years of, active addiction behavior, I drank for years and I did all these things as coping mechanisms and as masking, because my intuition was getting louder. And it was saying, we're uncomfortable, but I didn't understand that language. It was foreign to me. I would just feel the body making light of it, but I couldn't tune into it because I was literally groomed to not. The whole lean not on my own understanding, which was how my nature, my nurture taught me different, something else, So as I really started doing the inner child healing, and I know it just, sometimes some of this stuff feels so buzzworthy to me, and I'm just like, oh my God, everybody's talking about inner child work, and we can talk about it, but if you're doing it, it's crippling. I always say that God don't like ugly, and healing ain't pretty. So anyway, because of how I grew up in the cult realm and my first instance with narcissism and pulling me away in the grooming sense was quite literally how we reverence the Christian God, Jesus, Holy Spirit, all those things, right? So again, there are moments where I live in that space where I feel like I need to check in with a source outside of me to know how I'm feeling. So when I began to do that journey of the inner child work, and quite literally I would hold a picture of myself sometimes just in bed or have it next to my pillow, and I was comforting and literally in a parallel of existence, reparenting myself as the representation that I am now for myself, alongside with the wisdom and understanding of the tools that my parents did or didn't have and how they used them, as well as the community that was around me, the community that I was immersed in. And so unfortunately, a lot of that took me away from my intuition. The community did, because I was 16 dating a nearly 30-year-old man with 2 children, and the church wanted that. My parents condoned it. I didn't have an example to say, you know what, this is wrong. And that was very grooming. So again, my relationship with my own intuition was masked for years, whether it was other people's impressions on me, whether it was the Christianity cult realm that I had existed in, whether it was my mom's DID, whether it was my dad not being able to be present enough because he had to work so much, the community, the teachers that witnessed what was going on. And, not one person just like made that eye connection with me to let me know that what I was feeling in my gut, that I was actually right. So getting to a point where I was nurturing the younger version of myself and that quantum leap of parallel, whatever we want to call it, the space that I was in, I started really understanding that my generation had to do a lot of reparenting for ourselves because we came up in such a grooming time period, whether it was politics, whether it was our school system, whether it was the cult behavior, whether it was just like where we lived. My community only had 54 people in it. So we weren't provided representation of what it looked like to tune into yourself, especially if you identified as anything other than man. So pushing forward, I recognized after I got rid of active addiction behavior and I sat with myself for a couple years and I started releasing folks that were only holding me or knocking at a door of the old Dani that they had met where they had power over me. I'm no longer there. So you can keep knocking, but I'm not answering that door anymore because I don't even live there. I started to really feel my own energy and what it was when something felt bad, when something felt love, when something felt like joy, when something felt like warning. When people talk about red flags all the time, I did not have a temperature on that at all, ever. I was always in a position that I had to, again, being delivered to my abusers, you just understand that that's just the reality. And so you cope with it and we disassociate while we're in these spaces. And I had disassociated so hard that I had no idea what the sound of my own soul was to my intuition. So the more cutting of ties that I was doing, I was able to tap into that a bit more. I think that it's a really powerful thing for me nearing 40 that I chose to rebuild my trust with myself. See, people are like, I don't have trust issues with folks. If I have trust issues, it's typically prompted by the fact that I decided to trust or distrust something. And that's where I get mad, is that you drew me away from my trust. So my trust issue lays with myself. And that's also aligning with my intuition. So getting to be in this now where I am hearing the sound and the feeling and all of the senses that go into intuition, this gut brain that gives us warning, that is abundant in how it messages through our body and our chemistry, connecting with all the parts of ourselves. I get to pay attention to that now and I get to honor it. And it's not something that happens overnight. I still feel like there's areas where I'm like convincing myself. I'm convincing myself that I'm doing a good thing, or I'm convincing myself that, that self-sabotage part, that the way that we speak to ourselves, because if somebody wasn't there speaking at me, then I'm going to take the position of speaking at me because that's what grooming does. That's what purity culture and cult life does. It gets really into your frontal lobe as the developing age that you are. And I feel like there's portions of myself that still have to deconstruct that. I don't want to unlearn it because that's where my lesson is. I just want to take that learning and move it into a different space that is understanding, having peace with it, but it's also part of why I'm able to allow my intuition to speak clearly. My face is that representation. It uses its outside voice all the time now. So if upon meeting someone, I will engage immediately on my face. You'll see my comfort or my discomfort, my awareness to just taking a moment, a pause to reflect on how my spirit is feeling within that interaction. So all of that to say, I was gatekeeping myself from myself. And granted, life experience, I feel like I'm hearing a lot within the algorithm and things like that of just life, and stories that come around are traumatic. there's a lot of trauma in this life, but there's also a lot of choice on what you're going to do with your trauma. And I could sit here still and point fingers and blame everyone. I could really blame my mom and be like, well, it's because of this. And like quite literally try to not stand in the responsibility I have to myself now. And it's not even about being an adult. It's about the fact that I am reopening my awareness to a different type of nurture, which is the representation I am to myself now. And I get to choose differently in this new learning space that I am going to take that. I'm going to take the grooming. I'm going to take all those little ways that were used on me, all of the manipulation. And I am too going to be a manipulator. I'm going to manipulate things into peace. I'm not here to calm chaos though, right? I'm not going to take it on, but I will manipulate things in a certain way so that our perspective of each other is aware of each other. I'm not going to allow a person to look at me and believe that they're going to manipulate me negatively. And I will show that by sitting in that way of like, I'm going to manipulate goodness here. And it's up to you if you want to sit in that. So again, I think that we put a lot of power to the word manipulation always being a negative thing. And as above, so below. So for me, my partner actually is so brilliant and just constantly is reminding me of certain little things because of how actively they listen to me and to folks around them as this stoic human that they are in their beautiful, magnificent brain. And literally has told me, like, you manipulate, Dani. Like, you are a manipulator. And it encourages me so much because that's some of the behaviors that I learned in purity culture and in grooming. I witnessed, I observed, and as an autistic person, I took on those traits in order to keep myself safe. And now I'm using that in my community. I'm using these different tactics and turning them in a different way that isn't for the grooming in a negative sense. It's for the educating, for the empowering, and for the awareness. So in all of that, I just wanted to sit and remind us all that we don't have to gatekeep ourselves from ourselves by always continuing to point the finger at the trauma we existed in. Acknowledge it. You deserve to be acknowledged for the fact that you went through it. And now that you're through it, you get to stand in your power, tuning into your intuition, and moving in the direction of also embracing others that have been in that space, gatekeeping themselves from themselves. And now we're in our own power. I feel like I have so much more power the more that I take away the blame factor. Yes, did I grow up in a frustrating way? Of course I did. But the more power I take back by nurturing that younger version of myself in the parallel of the understanding and perspectives that I have now, I have and fine-tuned what my emotional body feels. And it doesn't feel as crippled in the crippling anxiety that it used to when energies would be in my realm that would make me feel as though I need to minimize myself. And I just feel so grateful to be in this space speaking to myself about this. Again, I'm not here to encourage anyone. I'm just here to tell my story. If it resonates, dope. If it doesn't, then we can all move along. But that was one of the biggest reasons that I got the tattoo story on my neck and on my throat chakras, because I had a tough time telling my story. And I've also used a different script sometimes in telling my story. I used to tell my story in this way of it not exposing certain things. And now I tell the story just like as it is. And I'm like, that's what happened. And, I want to educate myself on my own history so it doesn't happen again, right? Trevor Noah is who was saying that in their latest special. So thank you, Trevor, for that nugget. I've been loving that. So any old way, sitting here today, I would have never saw this for myself. I literally just got to go sit in the countenance of a room full of amazing, beautiful, indigenous folks fighting, using their voices, using their community as a resource, educating themselves on the history of, so they're not repeating that. And it was also accompanied by Jane Fonda. I would have never, ever thought that I'd get to sit in the countenance of such a magnificent group of individuals here in Commerce City. And also bringing in, having Jane Fonda there as a stance, as a grounding space that's like, yes, I'll use my voice too. It was so impactful, so powerful. And there's more to come about that on another podcast. But all that to say, I was gatekeeping myself from myself for too long. I was in that freeze mode for a long time about my own abilities. I was so worried about the titles that I had to have to achieve certain things or to be seen or to be heard. And once I started letting bits of that go, because we can't let it all go at once. So I can't. I'm like, I let little pieces of it go. But the more that I'm releasing, and the more that I'm aware that I am releasing consciously, like I'm allowing you to go now. You don't have to fill that space anymore. There's just been a lot more room for learning, for manipulation in the best way. And so getting to bond with my community, to sit down and hear stories that are in alignment with where my moral compass has been, where it's an alignment for what I feel that my purpose is, which is something I would have never even said 3 years ago. What is my purpose? And I'm finding that my purpose is to collect and connect people within the community, to make them aware of each other so that we can continue educating, again, ourselves based on the history in our community, so we're not repeating these cyclical and repeat. We're not in that movement anymore, in that moment anymore. And that's just something I needed to do for myself. And again, it's not easy. It's also not the hardest thing you'll ever do. The hardest thing that you'll ever do is sometimes say goodbye to an old version of yourself. Releasing that old version, that old ideology that we have with ourselves. You know, we take on definitions and perspectives and spaces that people have thoughts about us, and we'll take on those identities because they said that that's what we are. We remind them of something, so let's be that. We just get to stand in our own power now. Don't gatekeep yourself from your own intuition. Don't gatekeep yourself from a community that is learning about its history so they're not repeating it. Don't gatekeep yourself from your own childlike person. Don't gatekeep the nurture that you can bring. Don't gatekeep. Again, just don't gatekeep yourself from yourself. I don't know how many times I need to repeat that to myself. Again, talking to me. So thank you all for just tuning in, listening here. This is what I mean by living vicariously through myself. In all the years that I spent being groomed in purity culture, societally, in the small community I came up in, everybody else was living vicariously through me. And I decided not too long ago that I was just going to live vicariously through myself. I was not going to just look with my eyes. I was going to look through them. And I don't know how to say anything other than don't rob yourself of your own light. Don't rob yourself of the opportunity of learning about who you are and what your intuition is telling you. There's a lot of gems in there. Any old way, thanks for sitting with me. Thank you for listening to what it's like living vicariously through myself. And hopefully there's a space that prompts you to live vicariously through yourself today. Any feedback you would ever like to send me, I would appreciate it. Any reflection points, how this is encouraging or discouraging just the journey. I'm not saying my words. I'm saying the journey for yourself, if it's been encouraging or discouraging as you are doing this work. Today I am sitting in Denver Community Media. I'm alone in here recording my own podcast, learning how to do things that I never saw myself doing. And if it wasn't for me stepping out of the self-sabotage I was in, I wouldn't be here. There's a lot of voices like this out there, so let's tune into them. That's what I got for today, y'all. And just remember to continue creating earnestly in love. Peace.